We are? Okay. I did not get the notice. Interesting. Um, Funny.
Is it
You
still
still
not
have my...
showing up in the upper left-hand corner?
No, I don't. Maybe because again, here I see. Okay, it changes location when I'm screen sharing.
Yeah.
Okay. Last time we left ourselves, we left that conversation, we were working on this list of use cases, and there's one that was a placeholder for more, which was avoiding filter bubbles. I don't know if we want to start that or if we want to... I don't think we even finished the original list, or like we don't have as clear a prioritization process here as we do in the other one. I'm more guided by what do I see as the problems than what do I see as the core consensus. But maybe we should start having notes about consensus. I'm not... what I see as the main difference methodology between me and Tim is I'm starting with a model and I'm asking for you to tell me what use cases you see that my model doesn't cover, rather than saying, we'll build the model step by step. What's changed since last time in the model is that I've started putting the idea of variables. And basically a claim, I said the argument was a kind of claim. Well, actually, I'm now introduced composite claim, which is a unification of the variables and the underlying claims, if any. No, not the time for a break. And I can get into details about what that means. There's still a bit hand wavy about this, but it's getting more precise actually. And I'm beginning to have something that looks like rebuttal. I'm adding rebuttals to the model of an argument. And now I've been thinking a lot the past few days about the difference between the premise rebuttal model of argument that is used by truth maintenance systems. I gave that reference last time. And that was close to some of your support oppose, which in my mind is a valid way to discuss the epistemic layer. If you're speaking about beliefs, um, you have premises and rebuttals. If you're speaking about causal impact, it can get more complicated than premise and rebuttal. The notion of necessary or sufficient condition in a belief system, all the reasons would be necessary. If you have a different argument, well, it's a different argument with different set of necessary condition. So you get a kind of implicit disjunctive normal form on various arguments to believe a claim. Which works actually quite well.
Is it similar to the overlap that we talked a lot about before? Well, the distinction that we talked a lot about before between formal and informal logic? Or?
I don't think so. This is a good question. For me, okay, this is formal-ish in the sense that you're saying to believe this, I need to believe all of those, and that's an argument, and none of these other conditions need to be true. So that's the truth maintenance system model, which I'm provisionally adopting, though I'm still thinking through the what it entails, and I have hesitation there, but I think it's valid as far as it goes. What is nice about this is that if you have different, like if you have many sufficient, so here implicitly all the conditions for belief would be necessary. If you have many sufficient reasons, then you would have different arguments to support the same claim. And each argument would be a disjunction, which all necessary in that argument, and maybe a different set of necessary conditions in another argument. So if you have many sufficient conditions, you would basically have different arguments, each with a single necessary condition. And that's how you get sufficiency. So that works. And maybe they'd have different rebuttals. And again, that works. I see it works for epistemic reasons. I don't think it works as well for causal reason, because for causal reason, as I've discussed in the case of medical reasoning, I have cases where, well, it's 5% more likely with this factor and 10% more likely with that other factor and 20% more likely with that other factor. And so none of them are either necessary or sufficient. It's not the same. It's not the same kind of logic, and you can have complex equations. And this is why I still think my more generic, you get a conclusion which may have a probability value in this combination of conditions. I think that still holds. My more general model still holds for causal reasoning. But for epistemic reasoning, I think the truth maintenance system is actually quite elegant. So I'm almost going to distinguish them in the model. But right now I'm seeing if I can delay that. The more important, well, so not the more, but the other important evolution of the model right now is this notion of variable unification. When you're combining claims, and especially in an argument, if I'm saying, I have this condition, that condition, that condition, well, maybe they're talking about variables, and then you have to unify the variable. Well, in this premise, in that premise, or in that rebuttal, this variable in that rebuttal is the same as that other variable in that premise. We're speaking about the same entity. So the unification step is important in composite claims in general and arguments in particular. You need unification. Even I thought at some point, oh, maybe it's a way to have a single premise after all. But then I realized, no, I also need unification even with the variables in the conclusion. So what is variable unification? I'm still working a bit between, variable unification is more a feature of first order logic, when you have universal and existential quantifiers, whereas a lot of what we've seen so far is more predicate logic-ish. But if you look at, our classic Socrates example, it's actually very easy to do in predicate logic, but actually there's a hidden existential formulation of it. For all X in man, X is mortal. Socrates is a man in man, hence. So it's more an universal quantification than a predicate modus ponens. So I'm still struggling to, how do I want to model that? Do I want to get into existential and universal quantifiers, which are notoriously difficult in this modeling? Probably yes, but I think, yeah.
I didn't get a lot of that, but overarching here, I think that the main question that I've asked many times before is, do you want to model form logic being predicate logic and the more mathematical side of things where you can necessarily conclude from given premises the conclusion? Do you want to model that using the same model than informal logic, where you cannot do that, which way I would argue is that's the majority of arguments in the real world? But
I do want, up to a point, yes. And that's something else I'm thinking about. And this is not in the model yet, but I've just begun thinking about argument schemas. Like basically when you have an argument saying...
The argument schemas from informal logic or some other interpretation?
Any argument schema, that's the point. When you have an argument...
what do you mean when you say argument schema? Because that
I was just about to say it. I said, I'm just beginning to think about argument schemas, hence definition.
But you're not reusing an existing definition. You're introducing your own, you mean, or?
I'm introducing a new definition, yes.
Okay.
And though I am, of course, I am thinking of Willard. It's inspired by Willard. So yeah, it's not, I could just quote Willard, but here in this context, when I have an argument, it's between specific claims, right? I'm saying these claims warrant these claims. Now I can say that the grounding, to use Toulmin's terminology, of this argument is sound because it uses this argument schema, which is known to be sound, like modus ponens, like tertio non datur. We may agree or not agree with, not A implies A. We may agree or disagree with not A implies A, but I mean, we may in a certain domain say, yes, this is valid in our domain. So whenever we apply it, the argument will be considered sound and will not, like the whole notion of, do I believe or disbelieve this argument?
Not necessarily, because I mean, one of the things, well, depending how you want to model that, but one common thing with argument schemes is that they have a whole set of related questions which you could almost argue that also need to be answered in order to determine whether or not the argument is sound.
Absolutely. In the case of the Willard argument schemas, what is beautiful is that they have built-in rebuttals. So the schema would also generate the rebuttals.
Yes, yeah.
And I'm totally, and many schemas are heuristics and not absolutes and so on. So yes, it's so now saying an argument follows an argument schema, in a way, this is yet another claim. I mean, it's an argument. This argument is sound because it follows this argument schema, which is thought to be sound. So in a way, I can reuse the same structure, and I very well might. But we're having like more and more grounding here. And
yeah, what happens if you don't specify the argument schema? Because again, incremental formalization, I guess that you might want to apply that at some point, but what do you do before that is applied?
Yeah. Well,
do you store that in like the same model that you store the formal logic arguments, or?
Yes, the argument is just this link between claims, right? Before it's formalized. And I agree, the argument doesn't need the argument schema. But if you want to buttress your argument, what you may do is say this argument is sound because grounding. It is a special case of this argument schema, which is believed to be sound. And that would be the incremental formalization step. But yes, I don't. The argument is a link between claims. And that way, the basic truth maintenance system model of arguments, I've added rebuttals, but otherwise I'm very much following the TMS system. What is nice with the TMS system is that we have a kind of model of, in this viewpoint, these are the claims believed to be true, believed to be false, or not believed either. And we may even have a state where both a claim and its negation may be believed to be true for reasons, but then that means, okay, we know which chains of arguments we have to follow to find the inconsistency, because we have the premises that we can follow to find we have a contradiction. How do we resolve it? As opposed to saying, the difference between, there's a difference between we don't have any way to know whether this is true or false, which is one state, or we have reasons to believe this to be both true and false, which is a contradiction which needs to be resolved, which is another state which requires a different treatment. In one case, we're finding for reasons, another we're following reasons backwards to find, okay, which one is the most fragile and which one would we need to adjust.
But I think, I mean, that only works if from the perspective of an individual, right? I mean, yeah, sure, you can apply logic, but that means that the basis of the claims upon which that logic are based, the person evaluating it or whatever needs to believe or agree that all of these claims are true. Otherwise, the resulting conclusion is still open for discussion. So in a way, you can only apply formal logic once you have some type of evaluation or scoring from the end user. Otherwise,
I agree totally. Truth maintenance system is within the viewpoint, within the set of beliefs.
So
however, the links between, like the formulation of the arguments within the truth maintenance system, those can be universal. Those can be canonical. I'm saying this is believable because this. Now, you may disagree as to whether you believe in the premise. You can disagree whether you believe in the argument itself. That's different, right? But expressing the argument is canonical, saying this belief is warranted by those beliefs, if true, and would be rebutted by those beliefs if those were true. So that schema, not that schema, but that justification object.
In what ways is it then still canonical? Because I mean, it assumes that everything that it's built upon is true. What does canonical mean here, I guess? Like, why is that the argument, and why aren't there any other arguments that...
I'm not saying it's the only argument. I'm saying there can be many arguments, absolutely, but it's canonical in the sense, I shouldn't have said canonical, but it's belief independent. You can express that argument, that dependency relation, independent on whether you believe in its validity, the validity of the premise, the validity of the rebuttals, the validity of the conclusion, but you can still express it and say, this argument has been made, saying those conclusions lead to that, those premises lead to that conclusion, provided none of the rebuttals are true. That's an expression that is belief independent.
Well, yes and no. It's dependent on you believing in the logic underlying it.
No, I'm saying you may not even believe in the argument. You can still express it.
Yeah.
Whether or not you believe in it, you can still express it and put it in the canonical debate. Somebody has said...
By expressing it, you're here applying the argument scheme, or you're applying the modus ponens, or you're applying some type of logic, informal or formal, doesn't matter. So in addition to...
Or no logic at all. I can make a perfectly ridiculous argument, climate change is not real because the moon is made of blue cheese. It's a total non sequitur. I can still express it.
But
if somebody
we're
makes
not talking
an argument,
about we're talking about the more formalized ones, right? The ones where you do incorporate logic, like that must follow from, etc.
Okay. I'm saying this is a premise for that is already a kind of formalization. I'm calling that formalized. Now, it's not justified, and I can attack the argument, say it's a non sequitur, and to buttress it, I would have to connect it to an argument schema. So which is a further
So
formalization.
your base layer, in a sense, is informal. It's just that supports the other thing. And then if you want to add extra formalization, let's say that this necessarily follows from that you would call then some buttressing, which you do in an argument family, or in where does that
as I said, the argument schema is not there yet, but only actually what happens is it's a further argument saying my target argument is sound because it follows, it's a special case of this argument schema. So that itself, it's a link between the target argument and its argument schema. So that itself is a link, it's an argument.
But so again, your idea of incremental formalization is then that you can either just say it supports it, or you can say it supports it with an argument scheme, and the argument scheme can follow later, or something along those lines.
Right. And the idea is that certain arguments are checkable, right? Like you can say, yes, this is a valid specialization of the argument schema, because that's checkable. So a few things are machine checkable when it's formalized enough. Like, is this a valid specialization of the schema? Is the schema one that is accepted by the community? In the case of heuristics, it's a question. In the case of modus ponens, I think community that doesn't accept modus ponens is in trouble. But
can I ask, where you're using premise, is that, I just want to know whether there's a nuance there that I'm not aware of. For premises, is that the same as maybe pro or supports, or is there a nuance there that premises makes other assumptions?
It is similar. I'm trying to think. Okay, I don't think I have a clear answer to that, but it's premise in the sense that the way I've defined argument, those are all necessary conditions for the rule to fire. The way I've defined argument very narrowly, so that it's an atomic argument, maybe I should call it, because it's such a small thing. So that, yes, they're each, it's not pros, it's their necessary conditions in that argument.
So how do you model things that
are not necessary conditions?
yeah
That's multiple arguments, I presume.
Multiple arguments. Like, for example, I could say, I said I could have a different argument with different premises for the same claim, with the same conclusion.
isn't that kind of kicking the can?
No,
Where-
it's basically I'm taking this complex argument and I'm making it into a disjunctive normal form by saying it's a disjunction of conjunctions.
I don't use that terminology often enough to intuit what you're saying without really thinking through it. I mean, at some point you need to say.
It's an or of ends.
But it's not even in some cases. It's not even an or. It's like, here's some additional information that just adds weight to whether this is true or not. And here's another one, and here's another one.
I think those would all be separate arguments in the way with Michael Twain is talking about now. These would each be separate arguments with just one premise. If I understand correctly, Michael Twain.
Correct.
Wait. Okay. So an argument is a link between two claims.
Between
A conclusion
and premises and one conclusion. But so if your if you happen to have a case where you have n sufficient premises, like let's say you have 3 sufficient premises, then I'm saying the way I would model 3 sufficient premise is with 3 different arguments, each with a single premise. But if you have 3 necessary premises, I'll have 1 argument with 3 premises.
Well, 3 necessary in relation to one another, right? Because that's like cohesive logical units, basically. Everything that logically, cohesively belongs together to shape the argument is modeled as one argument.
Yeah.
I mean, are you implying that if they're in the same argument, they're all ands, and if they're in separate arguments, they're ors?
Yes, if they're in the same arguments, they're all ands, and if yes, exactly. Now, if we
How
have
do you
not
associate the 2 arguments that are ors in a way that they're not ands, if it's the assumption that all, because they both point to the same
conclusion. That's it. No more, no less.
So you can't, how do you model 2 different arguments coming to the same conclusion that are unrelated, that they aren't an or?
What do you mean by unrelated, Bentley? Because they are related in the sense that they come to the same conclusion, right?
Well, they could be two different people's worldviews on that conclusion. They could be completely unrelated arguments.
Yes.
But you're assuming that any 2 things that point to a conclusion are an or.
Yes. Well, okay. They're not an, and you're right. They're not an. How should I put it?
I think it's again, what are we modeling? Are we modeling one person's worldview, assuming that it's properly modeled, or are we just modeling contributions from anyone and aggregating it all?
Well, or what Marc-Antoine, I think, is doing is he wants to model all the views, or at least multiple views on the same topic.
Yeah. What I'm saying is one person believing 2 arguments with an or 2 persons believing 1 argument with an or, well, that's at the belief layer, right? You believe both of those, or you believe one of those. But if one person believes 2 independent arguments, there is an implicit or there, and I don't need the way to distinguish it.
But I also want to express it. Like at times I want to narrow down the discussion and just say, let's just look at this thing.
Yeah, perfectly valid.
So would I then be saying, let's reference this conclusion?
This argument, and let's reference this other argument. And because they have the same conclusion, there's an implicit or. Now, note also.
But then there's an or. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I don't understand why they're ors when we have 2 arguments. It's implicit or. To me, it's more like implicit and. When you're talking about, when you have 2 different arguments, the case you were talking about, where neither one of them fully proves something, right? If it's an argument by induction, what you're saying is more probably true than if you have one thing that says this increases the acceptance of that argument, and the second one that also increases the acceptance of an argument. There's no or, because neither is completely right. I see what you said. Or it adds up somehow. Yeah.
Well, okay. There's two distinct
because
cases
linguistically
here.
You would say and furthermore, right? Linguistically you would say this and also consider this, right? But mathematically,
Yes.
requires both to be true, and I see that.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm not saying there's okay. If you're speaking induction, or if you have many inconclusive or heuristic arguments, right? There's kind of two things happening. One is each of them independently adds some probability for the conclusion to be true. Now, in this case, the target claim, like if it's an inconclusive thing, I will say these arguments, it's not that they ensure that the claim is true, is that they ensure that the probability variant of the claim is true, so that they'll assign a probability score to the base claim, right? If A is true, okay, I believe, let's give a more concrete example. I believe global warming is real because the evidence from the temperature in this location, like because the Arctic is melting, okay, for example. And I say that this, I could say it's knowing that the Arctic is melting makes me say 80% certain that global warming is happening.
People
and somebody else,
that, but okay.
What?
Yeah, never mind, continue.
It's much higher than 70, but I'm trying to.
No, it's more like people don't say that makes me believe 80%. I just don't hear that in everyday conversation.
But, oh no, okay. You don't. I agree totally. But
normal people don't think through things.
No, well, no, but people will say most likely, or they'll use some most modal modifier.
Right, yeah. It's strong evidence for.
Right.
Strong evidence for. Yeah. That's but I'm trying to translate it. But you're right. It could be a probability score, or it could be a modality. And somebody else says CO2 measurements make it very likely for global warming to be true, right? And what I'm saying is it's an or in the sense that if either of them is sufficient evidence for a certain likelihood, right? If one alone is true, that's already enough evidence. If the other alone is true, it's already enough evidence. So that way it's an or. Now, it's possible that the combination gives us even higher certainty, right? So I could say both Arctic melting and CO2 measurements make it 99% likely that, like,
well, I guess the point there is that the majority of arguments, using your terminology here, are falsifiable and you'll never be certain. So you might have, I mean,
all the argument is saying is, given that this premise is true, here is the conclusion I believe to be true. And the conclusion might be a modal modification of a base claim, right? The claim, I think it is highly likely that base claim. But given those premises, the argument is saying, given those premises being true, and then you can believe or disbelieve and have evidence for or against the premises. That's something else. Or you can say the argument is not sound. It's not true that this premise makes this argument as likely as you say. That's a separate line of attack. But what the argument is saying is A makes B. If A is true, if A is true, I can believe B. If C is true, I can believe B. And maybe if A and C are true together, I can believe B even more. And that may be a separate line of attack. Why is the combination more likely than either? And that could be a separate thing. But why I'm saying it's a disjunction, why I'm saying it's a NOR, is because each of those, they're supposed to be reasons to believe on their own. And in that way, it's a disjunction. That is a sufficient reason on its own too. That means it's a NOR. The fact that the combination of reasons may be a stronger reason, well, that's a separate argument. Is it true that the combination is stronger? Maybe not. Maybe it's just, you know, a kind of Bayesian combination of the reasons independently, which makes it more likely. That's one case in which it's a stronger reason. But if it's the combination is stronger beyond the Bayesian combination, well, that's a separate argument which needs to be justified independently.
Yeah, I think I understand it, but it does beg the question: what is the canonical form? What is the form you're striving towards, and how do you migrate and not migrate, merge these? And that's for me always a key concern, because I do get it. You can model it one way, and someone else can do it, and then how do you eventually migrate it? So.
Well, each argument is canonical in its own base. What you can do is say, oh, for example, if I'm adding a rebuttal, right? Then I can say, well, it's a different set, so it's a different argument. And I can say this argument is more valid or more complete because I've added this rebuttal, right? This original argument was missing a rebuttal, or it was missing a premise, or it was an implicit premise. And so that's a relation between arguments saying this argument is more accurate than this one.
So you're implying here that a more complete argument, like an argument that extends on another one, is more likely to be more canonical in a way?
No, I'm not arguing that. I'm saying it's a different argument.
Yeah, you're arguing, you can argue that another one, but I mean, that just even adds to the complexity of non-canonicality. My question is more, why do you hope to go to, like, because it is a canonical debate lab, like what is the canonical form? What is the optimal form of an argument we're striving for here, I guess, is my question. Or is it just aggregating all the arguments in a formalized way so they are related to one another without making any curation efforts, I would say?
The curation effort is, for me, at the level of the claims. But the idea is once, like these arguments as claims, as entities, they'll start with a sentence. And the first step of formalization is identify the premise and conclusion as claims. And then you can try to be canonical about the claims. And then you can, and to do that, you may need to be canonical about the entities. But what I'm saying is
I fully agree. That's also where I stop. I mean, part of the reason why I don't do multi-premise arguments and stuff like that, or I don't want to even try to tackle it, because I think if we can just get canonicality on claims and entities in context for starters and just have single premise arguments to start with, we've already reached a level of canonicality that doesn't exist right now. And I fully understand the structure of like adding more logic and argument schemes and all that stuff. But for me, it adds more and more non-canonicality, and I don't see how you can fix that.
I don't see how it adds more non-canonicality, in that if two arguments that are developed into conclusion, premise, rebuttal sets, right? If they're different at the level of those sets, they're different. They're different arguments. Like making them canonical would be erasing real information.
But are they different is my question, right?
I'm claiming they are. I mean, provided that the claims have been canonicalized, of course. But what I'm saying is, once you've done the canonicalization on the claim, if arguments with different conclusion, premise, rebuttal sets are substantially different, that's entirely my claim. So it's...
Yeah, they are different, but if you fill in all the implicit premises and all that stuff, are they still really different? And then where they differ, all of a sudden, it might be some implicit premises of implicit premises. So all of a sudden, what I do feel, if you start doing this, one argument, the way you model it, becomes a whole world view, and then pretty much everyone has their own arguments because you keep adding implicit premises, right? Because you need to build an argument scheme on.
Okay, that's a perfectly valid point. Let me think about that one. Okay, first the arguments.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Noan. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, the white paper perspective on this is the gradual formalization are curation actions that change an existing one into more formality. So, at some moment, you'll have what are technically the same argument stated twice, perhaps, because like one person stated the argument in a less formal way and another person stated it in a more formal way, right? That's possible. So, one curation action is merging the two and saying these are the same arguments. But if you have just an informal argument, like one that I keep thinking of is, Donald Trump is a great president because he's building a wall, right? That's actually kind of it's an interesting example because first of all, it's an informal formulation. Second of all, there's a lot of hidden premises there. Third of all, it's actually an argument for or against, depending on your opinion on the wall, right? And so as you kind of break that down and study and formalize it, you might say, actually, Donald Trump is a great president, which is the conclusion, because he's building a wall that will keep out illegal immigrant or keep out drug traffickers, which are damaging the health of Americans or something. So there's a lot of, you could extend the reasons why, and you could then say it's also bad he's building the wall because it's a signal to the rest of the world, whatever.
But I think that
what it does is it takes this informal argument and modifies it or replaces it with more formalities.
But people might have different reasons to say that building a wall. I mean, some people might implicitly argue that building the wall shows character and like making America stand on its own. Other people might imply indeed, it prevents from illegal immigration. Other people, you cannot always fill in these gaps, and these may or may not be different arguments.
No, but you want, exactly, and you want to, because it's a weird way to formulate the debate that way, because you like, if you don't formalize it, you essentially have President Trump is a great president because he's building a wall, and President Trump is not a great president because he's building a wall. And so you have the same claim, and you have it being used as an argument to support an attack, and it's not clear why that is. So,
but in my mind, that is a formalization that it's not clear. I mean, once you start formalizing it more,
formalization,
you're taking one point of view, and that worldview I was talking about, and isolating it from other potential worldviews.
Well, what you need are every single variation of that argument that explains a reason why this supports or attacks that he's a great president. You need to pull out the details and create multiple versions of that argument. But the original argument that's vague,
But why can't there be multiple reasons that building a wall is good or bad?
There can, and there should be, but each one is a separate argument.
Yes, I agree. They're separate arguments, precisely. The whole point is to say, why do you believe building a wall is good? Why do you believe that even the first thing is doing a good thing makes you a great president? Is that true? If you do one good thing and many bad things, that could be attacked on its own, right?
Well, that's relevance.
What?
That's the relevance angle, but yeah.
Yeah. Is building a wall, even if you believe building a wall is a good thing, is that a sufficient reason to believe he's a great president? That's another angle of attack. But yeah,
right,
there's the question of, indeed, sometimes formalization will be tentative, and I agree with you there, in the sense that, do you mean this? Do you mean that? Do you mean this? And the reality is it will mean different things for different people. And you'll never know that you've exhausted possible formalizations. Somebody may come up tomorrow and say, actually what this means to me is this, which was not in the system yet.
Yeah. But then you have, like, I see that exploding.
Yes.
Like, all of a sudden you don't just have, building a wall, good presidents. Like, that connection you want to break up into, building a wall A, B, C, D, E, F, good president, building wall, C, D, whatever. Like, I find it relevant to aggregate just that people say building wall for different reasons. I think the main contrast I always have with you guys is that I just want to model what people say. I'm much more interested in just modeling and formalizing common arguments. And that's for me canonicality, just making sure that what is stated, the arguments that I made in real life, they can be canonically formalized in one location, as opposed to like interpreting canonicality as having that one out of all these different things that are being stated fully formalized in one way. Because again, there are many different ways of doing that formalization. And rather than modeling these separately, the way I see these being merged is exactly by making them less formalized in a way, so that all the relations between them are still there.
When you let the less formal live side by side with the more formal, you are no longer canonical, because as soon as I say this is
I was just explaining my interpretation of canonicality. I mean, I think you're going to argue from your interpretation of canonicality. For me, I just want common arguments that are expressed in the real world to be represented in one place. And yes,
let me ask you this. Do you want every argument that has been made in support or against it collected in that place as well? Or are you okay if there are arguments that are not there? And by that I mean, if you have, he's great because he's building a wall, and then you have he's alienating all our allies because he's building a wall. It's like, I mean, you have something like building the wall alienates our allies, right? Mm-hmm. And so you have one argument that he's great because he's building a wall. Then you have another argument that is by building a wall, he's alienating our allies. Mm-hmm. Are those the same argument, or are they different arguments?
Well, for me, it's an argument graph, right? It's a graph of interrelated arguments.
But when you put evidence that this is alienating allies, for example, is it complete if you only put that argument under building a wall alienates our allies?
You can reuse claims everywhere. You can reuse claims everywhere, no, so you can add any form of argument.
No, but what I'm saying here is you can, but you're not, because you've made the argument in one version of, you've made an argument supporting one version of the argument, but you didn't go through the work of finding every single other slight version of that argument that also should accept this counter argument. I don't know if I'm getting across what I'm saying.
No, I didn't get the last point.
What? Yeah. How can I say this? Maybe with a better, but yeah, the point. Go ahead.
Let me try, because I think I can say it. I think I understand what you're saying. The question is, you have the original argument, which is informal, and you have all these possible formal specializations of it. It's probably not formalizable as such, but we can have more formal specializations. And those more formal specializations, I think Tim is saying they must stay related, so that when you look at the original informal, you get all these informal specializations as a bundle.
There should be a connection between more formalized forms and yeah, definitely.
Is that what you're saying, Tim? Did I translate you well?
Yeah, I think that does it enough. I think we're all understanding the same point.
Yeah, I don't think there's a disagreement there. What I'm afraid of is that these formalizations, that's what I would call a worldview. That's one. I mean, that's what right now are different like news articles from different sites and with different religions. World. I mean, you can construct a lot of different arguments, and that's yeah. You definitely want to jump from the informal ones to the more elaborate, formalized arguments that fit within a certain worldview, so you can also compete these against one another. But for me, where the actually merging all the different arguments happens is on a claim to claim relation level. I think the more formalization you add, the more disjunct these arguments are going to become. But we could do the exercise. We can take the building the wall thing, try to formalize it a bit more, and see how you would represent them within a system in a user interface, for example.
That's a good exercise. I think I can take that as homework. I'd like to do that.
Cool. One thing, Stephen, is that what you said is you only want to formalize what people are saying, not what people could be saying.
I didn't say only. I said I want to formalize. For me, the main entry point for me being canonical means that there's one place where X because Y is centralized in one location.
Yeah, and this is where I suspect I disagree with one thing Tim has said when you said in the canonical debate, the formal and informal should not coexist. For me, some things are probably, well.
I mean, wait, I only mean that in the sense of where there's an overlap.
Yeah, and maybe I need to also go a bit further. Like for me, the partially formalized, like as I said, saying great president because wall, that's identifying those two claims is already a step of formalization, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. So that way, but I think it's something Stephen calls informal, and I'm saying it's less precise, it's hard to attack, it needs spelling out before it can be attacked. Like, why is that a good thing? And then you get into what Stephen calls the multiplicity of specific viewpoints that are attached to why is the wall a good thing? Why is the wall a bad thing? And he's afraid, and rightly so. That's a good question. I'm not sure I totally have an answer for his question. I think I do actually, but I don't have a perfect answer to his question about could there be too many of those decompositions, and how do you make that view manageable? It's a valid question. I do think that looking at, that's one reason I want to know who's actually saying that. Like, is that a representative sample, an important enough sample of the population who believes this? But I do think that going from the vague, even if formalized, partially formalized, the vague sentence like great president because well, to the more precise, the wall is great because blah blah blah. And those are separate arguments, but asking people to say, why is that a good thing? This is the process of argumentation. This is the process of trying to understand viewpoints. This is the process. And for me, making that possible is a core goal.
Yeah, but it is for me as well. But again, my emphasis is on merging data from different viewpoints. For me, A because B, and then all the different reasons why A because of B, I also aggregated side by side as yet another C because A. I mean, I don't make them disjunct.
I'm not taking them disjunct either. The fact that the decomposition is atomic doesn't make them disjunct in my mind. I totally expect to group them, yes.
Yeah. Some concrete arguments would be useful here. I think, Timothy, if you could do that would be great. And if you share the document, I can play devil's advocate and add some maybe even fictive stuff as well.
And I think my homework is making take a few examples of that, and maybe let's start with the Google Doc of what is the core argument in a few more formal variants. So we have
but also how would you display that, right? So I see how you can model it with this model, and I get it, and I see the benefits of it, but it doesn't really answer my question. How do you merge all the data, and what does it mean to be canonical? Because if canonicality is just capturing all arguments, I mean, you can do that with this model. I'm not disagreeing there, but I don't think it's going to be a canonical user interface on top of that. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
I want to envision what the user interface on top of that is going to look like. That's going to show that data.
That's a totally valid concern. It's another use case. I thought we had agreed we'd spend some more time agreeing on the model before agreeing on the UX, but that's okay because
I think
UX
they're
is
highly related here.
yeah, and UX is a kind of use case. Like you want like there's an, and maybe we should write it down, and maybe that's your homework, Stephen. You know, I as a user, I want to see all more formal reinterpretations of an informal claim in a way that I'm not overwhelmed or
But
something.
I wouldn't formulate it like that. You overcomplicate things. Users don't think that way. Me as a user, I want to find all relevant information in terms of why people believe that building a wall is a good thing.
Okay. So I'm proposing you write that down as a use case. As your homework. I'll try to make it clearer how I see it, not yet at the UX level because I'm not ready to go there, but at the formal modeling, instance diagrams, or language, because that's my, right now, I mean, something I've been working on these past few days is very much, you know, what induction, abduction, deduction, how do they look like in terms of, this is more propositional calculus, but how would I translate those in that model? And I'm working on a notation for that model so I can express those things, right? To make everything in my model, how would it look like as a JSON object, right? That's what I'm working on in parallel. But having cases of take a specific deduction, a specific induction, and a specific abduction, and make them work in the model. That's what I'm working on. And I'm also, yeah. An implication, the problem is implication is a bit overloaded. Like there's a whole logic to belief systems and there's a whole logic to causality systems that is similar but different, and we conflate both in implication. And I think we're missing some nuance here. And that's like this pure conjunction of disjunction works really well for belief, not so for causality. But anyway, that's my, but I agree doing this at the, that's something I'll put in the, maybe another document, but I think it would be good to have, let me just have a, 2021, 129, meeting notes. We formal statement. Oof.
We can say was now.
It's okay. And a few more precise.
Yeah, I think that would, for me, be a good exercise to maybe identify more like what it is we're modeling and what canonicality means.
Well, maybe we do have two definitions for canonicality, and maybe we need to choose different words or something.
Well, it's interesting that.
Is that what we agreed to do?
I think it's the same goal for both. That's interesting.
Yep.
But
Well, the reason for both, yeah, but I mean, so in the white paper we say canonicality, you know, it means only having what, actually I don't remember the wording, but it's like, you know, only having an item represented once, and then there's the other option that all the information you need is in one place and not having it divided among multiple places. I can't remember what it actually is, but we recognize that word's used in two related but distinct ways. And I don't know if you're emphasizing one over the other.
I'll think hard about this one. How to handle spurious preconditions. I think that
I'm not certain what you mean by preconditions, but if it's what I was referring to before, I guess I agree.
Yes. The implicit conditions.
Oh yeah.
Like
yep.
Yeah.
Well, in the UI, there's definitely going to be a challenge of deciding what to show.
Yeah, or maybe you just show the merge data in the sense that I want to build up from. I think you can do that even, but it's more if what you're going to show the user. That's why I'm more interested in the user experience here, because what you're going to show the user is going to dictate the interactions that they're going to use. Are they going to add their arguments with their whole worldviews and implicit premises, or are they going to piecemeal-wise just contribute to a bigger canonical map of claim relations?
I think the display is going to have to be customizable to the user to some extent. For example, if you want to know about the virus, and in my system, there's a score for whether you should take the virus. I'm going to want to display the top 4 or 5 things that most people would think is convincing to do or not do that. But if that person is an epidemiologist, they're going to want to be able to search for a specific study to see how that relates to the top score. So there's a difference between like the default score for anyone that we don't know, and then helping them find that extra information when they need it.
You said several things here. Canonicality can be how convincing it is, and then we're a bit like, what is the Reddit group?
Not really. Well, yeah, really more like how common. You don't want to overwhelm the person with information. So you want to, if you don't know anything about the person, you need to show them the things that they're most likely questioning in their head, or they don't know that is effective. You will kind of want to de-emphasize all the arguments that fringe people brought up and then were dismissed. But they have to be able to find them if that's in their head, because you have one unaddressed argument and they dismiss the whole thing.
Yeah.
So you can't ever not have the information. You just may not display it initially.
Yeah, I guess what I'm thinking intuitively, and I might be totally wrong, is that by having people add multiple arguments, multi-premise argument, multiple complex things that all relate to the same conclusion, you're going to get a massive aggregation of arguments than if you only have claim-to-claim relations. I think that's my intuition. Because if you have a canonicality of claims, if you do strive for that, there's only a limited number of claim-to-claim relations that you can aggregate. But either way, I don't think we're going to find answers here now. I think my question hints more at what is a canonical user interface? If anything, is it indeed that you show the topmost believed ones and then you can search for any other like you suggest? Or is it that you just show all the claims together? Or is it that you show, what is a canonical user interface?
Well, I think we're going to need some actual experimentation to know what it is.
I don't believe in a canonical user interface, and I believe that looking for that is a way to never get anything done. I do believe that we can speak about good enough user interface for certain specific goals, for certain use cases. I think we must think of what's a user interface that enables this or these use cases.
Which I really like Tim's use case from last week, right? That's why because it is a really common one. Hey, there's this claim I read on the internet and you want to know more.
Yeah.
Or you want to start analyzing it. Yeah.
It's a perfectly valid use case. I agree totally. And the question is, what's a good UX for that? But I don't think that there's going to be one UX that serves all the use cases ideally.
No, that's true.
I think there's a system that will allow multiple UXs depending on what you're trying to do. Yeah. So canonical UX, I think, is a misleading question. But
Okay,
thinking about what use case, what UX serves that use case is a perfectly valid and useful question.
when he said that, I was just thinking it was meaning if you have a big canonical claim, how do you display it? Not the one display to rule them all, but what are some ways to,
Yeah,
how do
yeah. No, that's a
yeah.
and again, let's be very clear about the use case. Like, for example, understanding all the reasons to believe this claim is true. Understanding all the reasons to believe this claim may not be true. Understanding all the reasons people may not believe this claim. What is distinct?
And I don't. Yeah, I'd push back a little bit about all the reasons. A single human interpreting an argument graph just needs to know the reasons that they
the
don't
most
know.
plausible reasons, the top plausible reasons, and there I agree totally. But and this is where, by the way, Stephen, I think the answer to your question does not exist at this layer in this bounded domain. It exists in the next bounded domain, where you start into having scores of belief and plausibility, and it's does anyone believe that adding that implicit premise adds anything to the discussion? And that is itself is, it's a claim.
But that's if you have, so that's the problem right there, why I have never done multi-premise before. If you allow to add many different forms of the same argument, and that's the thing, I mean, then you have the same thing that would happen on the phenomenon that the first ones to arrive get the most votes, right? Because the other ones are hidden, nobody's ever going to look at them.
No, I don't think they're different forms of the same argument. I think they're different arguments. And this is like, okay, in what case, and that's my question to you, you're saying that there are cases where arguments that are essentially the same would have different representations in my system. I don't believe that. Can you show me an example? You've told me, oh, you could be adding more implicit premises ad nauseum, which is a perfectly interesting point. But I would say they're substantially different, and we can distinguish, like, on the one hand, saying this, get back to my example about climate change is real because the Arctic is melting. And then somebody could say, and the world is constituted of matter. Well, that's true, and it's not irrelevant in the sense that certainly the world is not constituted.
It would happen more gradual, right? It would happen more gradually. You don't just that's what it might end up in the end.
But I'm trying to say and that's a good question. I mean, no, I still think it's a good question. Is how do I stop that even from coming in? It's not invalid. It's not adding anything to the discussion, unless somebody actually says, climate change is not a concern because the world is not real and it's an illusion, and so comes at me with the solipsistic argument, for example. Okay, there's never any answer to the solipsistic argument, right? If you're going all formal logic, you can make an argument in terms of, yeah, but it's not generative. It doesn't prove anything. When you go solipsistic, it has no predictive power. It's compatible with anything, but it predicts nothing. And maybe that's a caricature, fair enough. But the question is there a plausible rebuttal? I mean, I can turn this around into, is there a plausible rebuttal to this implicit premise is important because if it were false, and then I'm turning it into a rebuttal, it's if the world were not constituted of matter, then climate change wouldn't be real. Okay, is anybody taking that seriously?
But it's more a matter of relevance at that point. I don't know.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's the next bounded context. It's at the scoring level.
No, relevance is not scoring. Yeah, I don't know. I'd like to see some mock-ups because I've made many in the past and I just could not find any way to make multi-premise work in a collaborative environment where anyone can contribute. And that's why I kept pushing back on it because I don't see it.
Yeah,
Okay,
I actually don't. Yeah, I think a multi-premise can be represented in other argument schemas much more intuitively without calling it out, and that's why my preference
There's no
would.
problem. There's no
Yeah.
problem with the representation of multi-premise arguments. Are even clearer than not doing it. The problem is aggregating. The problem is a collaborative system where people can contribute. If you look at Stack Overflow threads where anyone can answer, etc., you need to find a way to curate and collaboratively contribute to little bits, so you're not again just disjoint. How do you do that? And that's why I keep sticking to this simple claim-to-claim relation, because at the very least you have the relevant information at hand, and then the multi-premise nature of things people are smart enough to do by themselves. Or they can write their articles or their different views on top of the canonical claim-to-claim relation database, I would call it for now. And then they can add extra formalization on top of that, using Marc-Antoine's suggested model or
counterpoint. How do you model, either at the UX or model level, real disjunction when you have only single claim premises?
You don't.
Because disjunction happens, right?
You don't. Like, the only thing I model is relevant information in relation to something supporting and opposing another. That's all I have. I don't model disjunct or conjunct or necessity or any of that. It's bits and pieces of information that are relevant in order to form a conclusion for another bit of information.
But if you have facts that in and of themselves absolutely do not contribute to the belief, A and B don't contribute to C at all individually, but they contribute in combination. That's a disjunction, right? Like both have to be true for C to be believable, but A and B individually being true does not contribute at all to C. How do you model that?
As relevance, I think I've showed that before.
But they are relevant if they're combined, but they're not relevant if they're separate.
Yeah, but the way I model it is A supports B, and then you can say, why does A support B? Oh, C. And that's in a way saying A and C support.
Okay, that's what I expected. Now, and that is non-canonical because you could also say C supports B because...
Yes, that's exactly what's written up in the paper as one of the... And I just add both forms. Because if people say...
And that's not canonical.
Not your form of canonicality, but again, my form of canonicality is I want to express what people say. If people say C, therefore A, whatever, I add that. If people say A, therefore C, I add that, and they live side by side. They're both shown. So I don't see that as a problem. Well, I do see it as a problem. I've written it up as, hey, that's something I noticed that happens. That's what people do. But since you have claim reuse, it's the same claim, and you're still aggregating all of the claims either way. So you even get additional information. You get these claims that somehow
you mean because it's the same conclusion, you mean?
Yes, in this case, because it's the same conclusion. So these just become supporting claims that are added side by side, but also within one another as YZ. So you get these redundant argument graphs. That's the downside of not supporting multi-premise claims. I fully know that. But at the same time, it all lives in the same space, in the same page, if you will. So people can now find this claim C or claim A wherever they come from. The relations are there. It's simply not formalized that it's an AND relationship. And I'm not fully satisfied with this. I'm just saying that's a conscious choice and experience I made, because what you're suggesting, but with supporting multi-premise claims, then how do you deal with it? You're going to have similar problems. You're going to have a lot of different arguments all coming to a different conclusion. And where and when do you add a new implicit premise? Do you see what I mean?
I see totally what you mean. It's interesting. I certainly would not do this at the model level, but I see the value of doing it at the UX level. But basically, I would model this as a disjunction at the data layer, even if I don't show it at this disjunction to the UX layer. But it's true that then you want to distinguish both. Am I putting the emphasis on the A link or on the B link?
And maybe you cannot place emphasis. It's one interesting thing by doing it this way I found out is that it does happen very often that like putting the emphasis on one than the other is linguistically easier to grasp, which is another interesting bit of information actually. Like if
no, I hear you. The fact that this may be more intuitive, that's an interesting observation.
Or it can even be more intuitive depending on the context you're using it in. That's another one. So I don't know. I know it's a problem, but I don't necessarily see it as a problem yet. It might. I think the only real way to figure it out actually is to have a lot of users using a system like this. But I'd love to brainstorm about having a canonical view or a predetermined curation form, because that's the alternative, right? That you simply say we don't want competing arguments. I think that's more what Timothy wants. We just eliminate the ones that are duplicates somehow. Like, how would that work? They're all valid considerations.
We're way over, so y'all tell me if y'all need to go.
Yeah, I can look already, yes.
Mark, Antoine, one thing, it seems like, and this is just an impression, I'm not saying that I know this is right or anything, but so premise is kind of a core, that association of saying these two claims and related to this argument are ands, you know, so that's kind of a mathematical model, and that's kind of hard coded into your model. The way I was thinking about it is that whenever you're kind of grouping a set of claims and their relationship in an argument, that you can state what the mathematical model is between them. They can be ands, they can be ors, and that goes all the way up when you're associating arguments into you know, when you're pointing arguments at arguments. Instead of assuming an or, they could be all these different forms, and thus not having premise being the base. Although I could see why you'd make premise the base, but I prefer
there's two things here. One is if you have a complex logical formula made of ands and ors in any kind of grouping, there's mathematical logical process for making it what is called disjunctive normal form, which is a or of ands of maybe nuts, right? So you're pushing you use de Morgan's law to push all the nuts to the terminals, then you rearrange with associativity to make sure that it's or of ands. It's a form, it's a process in logic. So in a way, I'm following that. Now, I think this is appropriate, again, for the epistemic layer, not for the causal layer, because as I said, at the causal layer, you may have complex equations. On the other hand, I think it is possible and probably desirable, even in the complex equation, like when you say, you know, it's this factor plus this factors times this other factor squared plus, you know, whatever. All those are possible in a causal model. If you look at biology, chemistry, you have these complex dynamic equations to say that these preconditions are more or less likely to give this outcome. I think even in that case, it is useful and appropriate to decompose it into the precondition is either present or absent. And when it's present, and so this is a way of saying, you know, you push negation to the terminals in the premise. And then let's look at one combination of presence and absence, and that's what I call atomic argument. And let's look at the equation there. Well, that means there's a certain probability of the result. And then let's look at another combination, and that's what I said by row, you know, another row, and all these rows together makes the argument family. Is that always the best way? It's okay when the things either happen or don't happen. When you have quantitative results, it's not right. If you say, you know, if the, let's do a foundation is coming soon. So if the economic inequality Gini coefficient is so much, the percentage of chance of revolution is so much. Let's do some psychohistory, pseudo psychohistory. Here we have a complex equation, and here decomposing and does not occur is wrong. We're doing what is the Gini coefficient? It's between so much and such a factor, and that would not be captured by what I'm doing. And then maybe, yes, we need something else to capture equations. I still think that I may cheat and say, well, this is the correct equation and make that a claim. Totally cheating. But I do, and I'm worried about that, to be honest. But worried in the long term, the way Stephen is worried but not worried about the duplication of arguments we just discussed.
So wouldn't it be prudent to not make the assumption in the model that that base form is premise and just have it be a relationship, and we can define whatever the relationship between those grouped up claims is?
I think,
and leave the flexibility in the system for the future.
I've nothing against it, and that's why I'm saying I'm thinking about distinguishing the belief system argument from the causal system arguments, because I honestly believe that the equations are reserved for the causal level and not for the epistemic level. I don't think you're doing equations for epistemic level. And that's why I still thought it was interesting to do this exercise, because I think it's valid at the epistemic level. But I think you're right about the causal level, and I'm probably going to distinguish next in the system. But this is, about, not make the system too complicated. But in this case, I think that keeping epistemic and causal level together maybe is making it more complicated rather than less. They share mechanisms, but they're also distinct at some levels.
Well, yeah, I'm afraid that if they share mechanisms, the way you're splitting up, they will have to be duplicated in the model, even the shared mechanisms, because you're making an assumption from the start. I mean, in my system, as it is now, when I'm putting it in there, I'm never going to have two premises on, so I'm going to be aggregating arguments, and each argument's only going to have one claim, because I don't have, one claim as a premise, right, of that argument. I'm not gonna, because I think a multi-premise is Tim did find an example that I agreed was multi-premise, but that was kind of more that wasn't the common use case. So kind of building that kind of rare situation into the core of the system.
Which case
I wouldn't say multi-premise is rare. I mean, there's a lot of them.
No, I wouldn't.
Well, no. It's a lot of crap is expressed as multi-premise, but when you really get into it, the premises are flawed in a fractional way that makes them no longer strictly multi-premise. It's not a Boolean yes, no, and this works. When you get into the discussion, realistically, you have to break it out of the multi-premise to actually model what people are trying to express.
Okay,
so I find multi-premise is in my experience, the multi-premise is a kind of a false, it leads people down
rabbit holes. It's you say it's an insufficient formalization. That's interesting. I have not found that. So I'm curious about examples of that decomposition that eliminates the multi-premise, because I don't see
Isn't that formulating multi-premise as composite claims in a way? But it would be interesting. I think we talked about this in the past, because I seem to remember having a similar discussion with you, Bentley. But
yeah,
wouldn't it then veer towards like introducing and within the claim itself, maybe within your system, or?
Yeah, so what I don't have in the system right now, because I assume one logic model in my system right now, but I've realized that when certain arguments come in, I'm going to have to say these claims or these arguments are related in an and or an or I identified like 4 or 5, and I knew there were more. So now it's just like, well, whenever I have a group of arguments that are pointing to another argument, then I'm gonna
You create the
relate-
conjunction.
Yeah, right. I
Well,
define the
but
conjunction. Now, when I
that's-
display it on the screen, I may not display all those levels, to Stephen's point. I may flatten them towards all in one display, but I can mathematically kind of show how they affect the top score because, I'm all in scoring. But
I'm sorry. This is a multi-premise. You just don't put it in one object. You put it in another object, but it's a multi-premise.
Yeah,
right.
to
No, my system can
canonical
handle
display of-
multi-premise. It's just not based on
Yeah,
multi-premise.
exactly.
Right. So it's the flexibility my system allows it, plus everything else. But I'm not hard coding it, saying that the core of every argument is a multi-premise argument.
Yeah, I have the same approach. I'm also not against multi-premise, but I want to model it on top of single premise. Exactly.
Yeah.
Be it as composite claims later if I want to support them, or as multi. I agree.
And I agree. You may be technically true that every argument, the core of it, is a premise, and that also may be based on formalized logic structures that have been done in the past. My preference would still be to leave us an escape hatch in case.
Okay, I cannot say that's wrong because it's isomorphic on the one hand. I think it's a mistake because
I think it's a consideration from a UI perspective, if maybe, but they might have different reasons.
We can hide it in the UI though. You just don't display the level.
The UI consideration I do think is interesting, that maybe we should display things one premise at a time, and that's a discussion I'm perfectly willing to have, but that's not the conversation I'm having now. I think it's interesting, it's relevant, blah blah blah, but I don't mean that this is a UI level that I don't think should affect the model, because I think we should allow UI flexibilities. Like I may find a multi-premise UX even if you don't, or somebody else may, even if I don't, doesn't matter. We shouldn't bake that UI into the model. The question is, which is the good, an efficient way to express the model? And again, your system is not wrong because it's isomorphic, but I think it's wrong in that it's inefficient for the following reason. It's that I'll be interested in variable unification. And variable unification between the premise, like if you have a compound premise, then you have kind of two layers of variable unification, one within the components of the compound and another one between the compound and the conclusion, because that's also necessary.
Can you phrase this in a concrete example, maybe? So it doesn't sound as pure mathematics, so we can follow more naturally as well. Like give one example of variable unification.
The variable unification is saying, I'm afraid most of my examples do come from math, propositional calculus, P of X and Q of Y. The idea is each of the parameters are formal parameters, so they're disjoint per se. So, if you say P of X, if you say P of XY and Q of YX versus Q of XY, right? So this is where the variable unification comes in.
But didn't you say before that you wanted to decouple the causal, because I would call this causal, from the more epistemological model, or at least?
No, I'm saying this can be even at the epistemological level.
Okay.
When you're saying, I believe that.
Then you should be able to find an example, right?
Yes. Okay. Let's even take the base example. There's implicit. Okay. No, actually, let me find a good example. Okay, I'll start with a joke. There's this joke I heard once. Fighting with someone stronger, fighting against someone stronger than you is stupid. Fighting against someone weaker than you is cowardly. So any fight involves an idiot and a coward, unless it's a draw. It's a silly joke, but I think it's it will serve as my example. Here, the reason I wanted to fight is because there's two people involved, right? Fight between X and Y, who are indeterminate persons, we don't know. And then stronger X and Y, and then
yeah. So you want to. I see where this is headed. So you don't want to model a concrete argument. You want to model a function, pretty much.
Yes.
And to put it in software development terms. And
yes.
Then you want to reuse the same function across different variables, which maybe.
And then you need variable unification to say that the X, which is the formal argument of stronger, the first formal argument corresponds to stronger, and the second corresponds to cowardly, and not the reverse, and not the other way around. That's variable unification. And so the and I need to do variable unification between the premise, and I need to do variable unification between the conjunct premises, and I need to do another unification between those premises and the conclusion. And I find it less efficient to do two unifications than one. So I'd rather have the unification be done at a single level rather than layering it down to the conjunct separate from argument. But I'm not saying you can do it either way. As I said, they're isomorphic, but I find it more elegant to have a single unification.
First of all, I think we need to have a discussion whether this is something we want. And if we want it, but yeah, I mean.
Whether we want to be able to represent the...
I would consider this an argument scheme, to be honest, most likely. If
yes,
there's
absolutely.
such a thing that's useful to reuse, I would consider it an argument scheme.
Yes.
Yeah, Marc-Antoine, I don't know. So, I mean, you're kind of saying, well, I'd rather do one rather than two, but that also means that if I'm understanding it correctly, which I'm not sure I am, if I was going to like materialize this into a database and I have a whole bunch of statements that are ORs, I have to then represent each and nothing and nothing and nothing and nothing. So I'm doubling my records and my complexity of looking at that data. If I have 4 ORs, I now have to have 4 arguments, 4 claims, and then OR those 4 arguments together. So for me, that's 5 transactions rather than...
No,
I mean, that's like 10
1 second.
Instead of 1, 4 instead of 1.
I agree, but does it really matter though? I mean,
the ORs are not, you basically get many arguments, right? So you get many rows, that's not a problem. The ANDs, well, it depends what database you're using, but I expect the database to have an array form, so you can have an array form of the target.
Yeah, I'd have to have an array of an array of one item.
Yeah.
All over the place.
Yeah.
And the percentage of times that I use that I put 2 items in that array is pretty small.
That for me is absolutely, you need to, that's a claim and it needs to be supported. You say you can decompose it.
Well, I would say from a design standpoint, you have to show that it's always necessary to put more than one in there.
I have to show that it's sometimes necessary.
I would know, because
from a design point, that's not even the right question to ask. From a design point, you can always.
You'd have to show
one.
that's a majority of the time.
No,
yeah, but
before I create an array, when I have a represent structure someplace else in the system already that can handle it, if I'm going to put an additional array below, I need to justify that by saying that's really use. Otherwise, it's added complexity.
It has to be real. It has to be non-marginal, but it doesn't have to be majority. It just has to be frequent enough.
I don't think putting in an extra concept into the system. I think you have to justify that saying it's a majority.
Well, you're putting an extra concept, which is your conjunction.
Yeah,
No,
the
that concept
is
has the concept. The concept.
Your
No, the concept
conjunction is an
no,
extra
no.
concept.
You already have a conjunction in the concept, because in later on you're conjuncting all the claims you're conjuncting all the arguments into other arguments. That concept already exists. You're adding an additional concept of premise, which is a specific type of conjunction. So you're creating a specific case and you're adding.
No, you're doing that. Sorry.
Oh.
For me, no, seriously. For me, the argument has multiple premises, which is indeed, whether it's an array or a joint table or, foreign key, probably a joint table actually. But you are saying you're handling double a conjunction by putting two claims together in one conjunction. And for me, you're adding a table for those conjunctions. That's a new entity.
What I'm saying, well,
now,
I guess what I'm saying is that you're taking two topics and you're associating one to the other, saying pro or con. And in that association of topics, because I'm not saying whether it has to be a claim or or a previous argument, the relationship between those grouped together arguments in their association to their parent argument is that you have a designator of what that relationship is between them. Are they ands or ors?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is this formula is an extra entity.
No, because you need that formula anyway.
I still think it's isomorphic. I don't think it matters really. It's two different ways of modeling the same thing.
I'm more worried.
But I'm saying that Marc-Antoine already has my second model in his system. I may be misunderstanding that, but I'm saying that I can model it.
You may have a point there, actually.
Yeah.
But but I'm more worried about the fact that Stephen has two rows for where I have one. That bothers me because for me,
the rows represent something different for me. For me, the main reason is I'm modeling what people say. If people say A supports B, I want to model A supports B. It's something different than modeling a full argument, which I also want to support, but I consider something that I, like Bentley says, to do on top of this mode-based structure. And that's what I consider writing articles and whatever. You just construct your own argument, in which case, if you do want to present one worldview, one convincing argument, I do think extra formalization will be brilliant and more convincing, but I don't think you can make a canonical merged view using that. I believe when you want to merge them, claim-to-claim relation aggregation, I believe, I don't have much evidence other than that I've been brainstorming about this for years, it is going to be more functional and useful to the user. And from the claims, they can, of course, go to all the different, more formalized arguments because the claims are still linked.
I have a question for you. When you say, when you put because B, and you say supported by B, is B necessary, in which case it's equivalent to my disjunction, or is it support as in this is a reason
relevant information why people would believe it's support, why people would believe in the conclusion.
Yeah, which is very different. And I'm saying I want to distinguish the cases where they're both necessary conditions versus they both supporting conditions.
Understand that, and it's a very useful distinction. And then that's what I would do in a more, and what I would call a second layer, a more incremental formalized layer. My base layer indeed is one claim to another claim. And if we could get that to work, I would be very happy already. Because
and one is a necessary and one is a support in that case, and the other case, and the other row is different because you switch the necessary and support roles. Is that right?
I can follow you there.
Okay, when you model A and B implies C by this, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. What I understand is that A and C actually have subtly different roles. In the case of A, it's a necessary precondition, versus B is a kind of more vague support. And hence the other one is different because B is a necessary precondition and A is a vague support. Whereas
it can be either again. I mean, supported by B is, it gives you the way I always formulate supported by B is assuming that A is true. Does B give you more reason to believe in C? I think I formulated something like that.
Right. And that's what I mean by vague. It could be necessary, but it could be vague. Like you don't know if B is necessary in that one. And then you don't know if A is necessary in the second one. And so if you want to model that both are necessary, it's not possible in your model as such.
No, of course not. Like I said,
okay. No, I'm just trying to understand. And where you do convince me, Stephen, is when you say those are distinct claims and I want to model them distinctly, because I agree. If one is more, one is necessary and the other is vague support, yes, they're distinct claims. I'm saying I want to model separately the one where both are necessary, because for me, that is also a distinct claim. And being able to do that is a necessary use case for me and not for you.
No, it's also a necessary use case, but I want to build that on top of what I would call more canonical argument graph, or claim graph is maybe a better word for it. They are necessary use cases, but I think if you want to have a canonical database, that the first goal should be reaching canonicality in claims and claim relations. If we achieve that, then I hope that would enable the other use cases. It's a matter of priority.
Yeah, but I don't see my use, like, okay, I don't think I'm less canonical than you and by that definition of canonicality. Though it's true that my A and B implies C, if I use both premises as necessary as in the conjunction, we're not getting your use case of vague support and the distinction between those two variants. I would anyway do the vague support separately in the sense that I would have, and this is something maybe I need to demonstrate, what I would do in that case is A implies C and B supports A implies C as a separate argument, which is different than A and B implies C.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think
A and B implies C is a more specialized form, I would say, of A implies C
supported by B.
Yeah, it's a more formalized form.
It's not more formalized. It's a different claim.
Yeah.
Because provided B is a heuristic rather than necessary, right?
But so overall, I'm not arguing against the model I mean, I've thought about this as well, and I've looked at all the systems from the past, and I mean, again, my main reason of not doing it is because the systems in the past have not been used so far outside of research, and even Kialo, which doesn't do multi-premise, has its own problems. I think there's bigger fish to fry. So I would really love that you guys brainstorm a bit on. I mean, we have multi-premise in the debate map, right? So, but that's not a collaborative system. It's being used by societal library, and in use cases like that, yes, multi-premise is awesome. If you have a single curator that wants to construct knowledge, and yes, multi-premise is super useful, and it's a primary use case. How does that work in a collaborative view? And how do you decide which one to show, which not? When do you merge them? How do people that have already expressed opinions on parts of the claims, etc.? Those are all the questions that in my head go unanswered with multi-premise.
Okay, that's a good brainstorm. I'll try to come up with something. And Bentley, I'm sorry, I still need to understand. I get the impression you're saying, at one point you said, I'm hiding the conjunction behind a composite claim, which is isomorphic, but at some point you seem to say something different. You're saying, oh, people use composite, but they don't really need composite. And that I want to dig into, because maybe you're seeing something I don't there.
Well, I don't know. That's kind of a big discussion.
It is.
I think more importantly is that I think is that discussion on whether it's more concepts to base everything off of the other one. But in short, I think most of the time when people are saying this must, when you're using a multi-premise claim, most of the time you find out that one of those premises is not exactly a premise. And then you have to break it out into not a multi-premise thing. And so like a lot of the multi-premise arguments where they say Socrates is a man and blah, 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 you're arguing over a definition of a word, which is not a solid argument. And so I find out most of the times it ends up people arguing about, oh, well, this is what this word means. And it's like, well, a word doesn't have a single definition. So I can't remember the example that Timothy gave me where it was a true multi-premise argument. So I might need to look that up, but it took me a while to find one, and Tim had to find one. But most of the time when I find a multi-premise argument, I find it breaks down.
It begs the question whether definitions are arguments. And to
Yes,
me, definitions
they're
are
not.
claims.
Right.
To me, definitions are claims. And if you don't believe definitions are claims, yes, I understand your point of view.
It's not even a claim. They're separate arguments. They're just, if two people have two different definitions of the word, that I'm sorry, yes, it is a claim. It is the
You're claiming the
conclusion.
definition is valid.
They're two different definitions are just two different conclusions, right?
No, they're different premises in a way. But I see what you're saying. That does make sense to me. That a lot of often a claim has all kinds of implicit definitions, and we often speak about the analytic part versus the empirical part of a claim, and many claims actually, it's made of words, so there's got all these analytic components to it. And when you have, I can't believe what you're saying, that in many multi-premise arguments, the analytic part is more important in many of the cases.
It's very interesting you bring this up, Bentley, because in a way I agree, and I just thought of something. Even though I stated many times now I don't want to support multi-premise, one of the main conclusions from my previous study is exactly I want to support more support for context, and one form of context for me are definitions. So when you say Socrates is a man, I do want to add a definition to that, to man being that specific definition of man, which might be man are mortal beings, blah, blah, blah. So rather than modeling Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, blah, 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 I would indeed just say Socrates is a man, and man becomes a additional context to that claim, which in a way is also equivalent to multi-premise, right? If you look at it that way, because it becomes a better defined claim.
Well, yeah, once you start doing that, you end up having a circular logic, because your definition of the claim presumes the premises that you're using.
For me, context,
so it's kind of a waste of time.
It's the same. When I introduce context, it's things you need to assume are true for the claim.
I guess you're right, and that is a premise, but only if it's debatable.
Not all arguments are analytic arguments. Many are, and that's what you're saying, Bentley. Like they're analytic in the sense that once you've agreed on the premise, the conclusions, and well, that's an analytic argument. And Wittgenstein has argued that a lot of arguments end up being analytic arguments, but not all of them. There's often empirical fact once you've, pinned all the definitions. But the notion that separating the analytic premises from other premises, that is something interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I like it.
Cool.
I still think there's multi-premise stuff remaining, but that's
well, yeah, I agree that there will be cases of multi-premise.
But fair enough.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but I think the more important thing is that I think that if we can model the multi-premise in your model without having to have premise as one of the core be one of the core relationship types, but because of other flexibility in your system of handling the relationships between arguments, then I would say that we don't need that extra concept.
Yeah, see, I don't see why I need that, because for me, at the underlying data model, I would say functional roles are the exception. And functional meaning single valued roles, single valued properties are the exception, not the rule. I
So
understand that.
you're saying that most arguments would have multiple premises?
Which
No,
arguments? The expressed
I'm
ones
saying,
or the analyzed ones? Most analyzed ones have multiple, most expressed ones have single premises, I would say.
Many have single premises, many have many. That's not the point. What the point I'm making is, I don't see the point about forcing them to have a single argument, because like if you're using a relational model, I see the point. In a table, you prefer a single foreign key to a joint table. But I'm not using a relational model. And in the model kinds of models I'm using, multiplicity is the rule and not the exception.
No, it's more of a concept thing. It's like, if I take out you need to have a way to say that these two, and I may be using the terms correctly, but you have and actually I don't know in your model whether an argument is the link between, so like you have arguments are in a hierarchy, right? So you have an argument with multiple child arguments, right?
There's many,
and you have a relationship.
There's many relationships between arguments.
Okay.
But yes, some of them are about the argument being more precise than the other, for example. Specialization, distinction, those are all topic relations. They can be true of claims or arguments. I'm not sure. And then there's the argument family relation, which is a very special case.
What were you trying to say, Bentley? Maybe use your own language and let's see.
I guess what I just, my thought is that if you take out that line, the premise line,
yep,
you can still represent a multi-premise argument in your model.
That's true.
So that line is unnecessary.
Well, I'll need to move it from claim to composite claim. Well, I guess. So yeah, I can remove the star and make it a 1 because I can use composite claim. I agree, that's true.
Well, yeah, right. And so thus having it there is kind of forcing me to say that I have to reserve room in my brain that when I'm looking at this model, that we're making an assumption of a premised argument rather than
multi-premised argument, yes.
Yeah.
Well, even if I put the 1 there, you can have the composite claim there and you have multiple premises in another way. You have to reserve your space in your brain for that anyway. But whether it's done through this link or that link.
No, but it's
less visible that way.
But it's the concept that I'm collecting claims together and then I'm saying what their relationship is between their claims, as opposed to saying I'm collecting all the claims up as premises and then I also can collect them in another way and say what they are. So you're kind of hard coding in premise. It's always there, whether I need it or not. And it's like, well, if I can do it in there, why do I have this extra definition?
Yeah, and remember that
why hard code premise into the system? I guess I don't. That's what I don't understand. Is that you need a reason to hard code that in. That relationship type. When you have any claim can have any relationships. Now you have 2 relationship types. One's hard coded and one's not. Why not just leave it the other one?
Okay, the fact that there's two ways to skin a cat is wrong. Yes, if that's what you mean, but I'd be more tempted to eliminate composite claim than to eliminate multiple premises. That would be my natural direction, because for me, the anomaly is the 1 here. The anomaly is not the star.
How do you composite arguments?
Argument is a claim. But yeah, I mean, in natural language, that would be a really weird thing to say.
You do have composite arguments, right?
Because arguments are claims and claims are composite.
But I mean, try just phrasing it in your head and what that would mean. Nobody argues.
Yeah, composite claim is an awkward part of my system, and I'm not happy with it. And I'd rather eliminate it. I'd rather work to eliminate that than work on removing the star.
Well, I just at some point you have to, if you're going to do any sort of analysis, on what people mean and scoring. You're going to need to know, are those ands or are those ors or XORs, or what's the
Yeah.
relationship between these claims?
Absolutely.
And so if you have to have that, where you have to store what is the relationship with these claims, why have a separate one that says, oh, but we have a special case for premise? Now you've taken something you already handle in the system and you've isolated out a special case. And I just don't see the reason why for that.
I understand the question now.
Yeah.
And for me, the reason, the thing is, the way, because this is precisely how I'm breaking it up. I don't have to have the composite claim, probably don't need, because I'm taking and as a special case. The or is just the fact that there's multiple arguments, and that's it. I may not need the composite claim.
Well, yeah. So I guess the difference is that I think most of the time we need the other and we don't need the multi-premise, because very few times does an argument come down to where everyone in the argument agrees that they're all ands.
No, not everyone agrees that they're all ands, but those are different arguments. I'm saying the ors are handled by the fact that there's all and, that there's multiple arguments.
Yeah, so you're assuming an and at one level and then assuming an or at another level.
And I'm saying there's, because of de Morgan's law, I can always cast any formula into disjunctive normal form, into an or of ands.
But it's not an or, because if you have competing arguments, all of those are ors. We went over that before.
Yeah.
But isn't there a time where you're going to have to and together some lower level ands or ors, ands and ors and ands, like as you go up the hierarchy tree, and that's where you need that composite argument?
No, I think there's a difference in the ors. I think I can better formulate what I was saying. Sorry, Bentley, if I interrupted you. Like, there's a difference between one individual saying A or B.
Yes.
And assuming that because individual A says that one argument and individual B says another argument, that there's an or relation between these two. Those are entirely different things.
I agree totally with that. But and what I said earlier, we've been through that, is this is at the belief system layer where individual one will believe the A argument and believe the B argument, which is the saying he believes in A or B. Whereas individual two will only believe the A argument and individual three will only believe the B argument.
So then you're only allowed to model, oh no, yeah, no, you model it on argument level.
Yeah.
Well, what? Well, so is there a way to and two arguments together?
What, I'm not sure what you mean by anding two arguments.
You don't do that
in terms of
apparently.
premise.
I think that means that's one argument then, right? So
there's an argument with more premises.
Yes.
If you have an argument saying A and A causes C, an argument saying B causes C, and you want to end these, there's two ways to do it. One is to say both those arguments are valid, which is fine. And the other, which is totally different and totally disjoint, saying A and B are together necessary for C to be true, which is a distinct argument where A and B cause C, which is where I have
maybe I don't know where the ors are then. Because every time you're taking two arguments and you're putting them together, it's assumed an and. Where's the or?
No. You have multiple
no.
premises in one argument. That's
that's where the assumed end is between multiple premise in one argument.
Or is multiple people a single person believing in multiple arguments.
Yeah.
Okay. Well. Okay. So you got climate change, right? And you have the polar ice caps are melting. And below the polar ice caps are melting, you have thousands of arguments that are arguing whether that's true or false.
Yes.
And then I want to or that with something else, but I also want to and it with something else. I guess I don't understand how I would show that.
There's
one or the other.
let's decompose a bit. There's the argument A implies C, which is ice polar caps cause climate change. And that's an argument. That's a single argument with a single premise. Then there's all the reasons to believe ice polar caps are melting, which are their own family of arguments, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever relation. So what do you want to end it with, and what would be the assumed meaning of that ending. Like if I want to say it's
You
also
would
true.
anti-conclusion, not the argument in this case.
Yeah, if you want to say, there's two cases I see. One is where you say it is also true that
CO2 is increasing.
CO2 measurements demonstrate climate change.
Right.
And you're saying both of those are true. So
Well,
here,
that's an or, right?
That's an or. That's an or.
Mm-hmm.
You could also say polar cap melting demonstrates climate change only if this other precondition is true. You're adding a precondition. It's polar cap melting and no solar activity increase, right? So there's, and here there's a problem of canonicality, is that the solar activity increase can be modeled both as a rebuttal or as a negative premise. And this is why I wasn't sure on rebuttals at first, and I'm still wavering on that one, because I may be breaking canonicalities. But let me hand wave that one away for now and say, let's put it all in premises and forget rebuttals. So I'm adding a premise, I'm adding an end. And I'm saying so, and here I'm making a new argument with two premises instead of one. And I'm saying this new argument is more precise than the original argument, which only took into account. So that's a relationship between arguments. I'm saying the first argument was incomplete. The new argument with no solar activity is more precise. And now Stephen asked a very good question of what do I display to the user between the more precise argument people may accept or refuse that it's more precise, and you may get into more precise argument that feel spurious and obscure and arcane.
I think I'm still missing something. So you have climate change and you have melting ice caps and you have CO2 raising.
Yeah.
Either of those could do that. How, what is what? I know it's an or. How do you represent it in this model?
Well, I have one argument saying ice cap melting demonstrates global warming, and I have another argument with, again, single premise, both are single premise, saying CO2 measurements demonstrate global warming. So that's an or. There's two arguments. It's an implicit or, because there's two disjoint objects that both go in the direction of the same conclusion.
Where's the link between those two?
There's none.
Those two in the conclusion.
It's the conclusion link.
They both point to the same claim.
They both point to ice cap warming as the same conclusion claim. So if I go from the conclusion back, I see here are different arguments pointing to that same claim. Global warming is happening.
So if I wanted to, I could model a system without premises because I just use conclusions.
Well, you need the premise to say what's the premise of the argument.
At least one premise.
At least one premise.
What do you call an argument is simply one claim pointing to another claim, right? So you would have one premise and one conclusion. The only difference here is you can have multiple premises and even rebuttals.
But let's forget rebuttals for now. But yeah, so what I can have is say, well, CO2. We're speaking about anthropogenic climate change, presumably.
So, and then you're saying you don't even want to go into the fact of handling. Okay, so you're saying since everything can be handled down at the at the and or level, those are justified at being hard coded as the types of relationships.
But last time you asked, I did say I'm still a bit hesitant because this is perfectly valid for the epistemic layer and maybe not so valid for the causal layer where formulas make sense. So so I guess my leaning is that instead of having conclusion and premise, I'd rather have supports and then say how. But then you need some sort of composite
item in order to store what is the shared relationship between all these children,
Yeah.
right? So that's an additional concept that you're not sure that you're gonna need until you get to the level where you're doing
To the causal
formulaic.
level.
Yeah, to the causal level. Okay, so yeah, just so you know, so in reason score, the path I was thinking of doing is supports and opposes, and then there is some sort of grouping in that claim. And it's database wise, you know, I have a claim, and I have, here are all the child claims, which are kind of like arguments.
What's a
stuff like
child
that.
claim relationship for you? I'm not sure I understand what it means.
So it's really saying that these items have either a supporting or opposing relationship between the claims. And at some point, I'm just waving away the term argument. But and really for me, the line is the argument instead of like a class or an object.
I'm reifying the argument relation because I
Yeah.
want to have relationship between arguments. And I want to use an argument. I'm saying the argument is a claim and can be itself buttressed by another argument. And that's why I need to reify it, really.
Well, yes. So I think that
I can have
also,
belief or disbelief about the argument. And that's another reason why I need to reify it.
So yeah, Tim has a similar concept of saying, yeah, and I'm not opposed to reifying it. I'm just saying I hadn't modeled that yet. And I'm not opposing that it would be. I would like to have a,
We actually agreed to model it on Monday, not Tuesday.
yeah, right.
I think it's important to model because it can be target of an argument, because it can be source of an argument, because it can be believed or disbelieved individually.
So when we get into the formulaic parts where you can use math and modeling, I'm actually modeling that association in the formula rather than in the model.
And there, as I said, I'm kind of schizophrenic about this, and that
Yeah.
I see the point of this and I see the point of this. I think there is an advantage to treating conjunctions and disjunctions a different way, because the link between conjunctions is rarely that close. It's like there's this argument or there's this argument. Which one do you want to use? And there's a case where the arguments reinforces one another. Well, you want to know about that as a distinct thing. You want to argue for the reinforcement separately.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most case, like in the reason score math right now, well, no, actually, this isn't the case. Right now, it all averages everything. But there's a use case where the more evidence you gain, the more studies that do this, the higher confidence you have in that
Yes.
item being true.
Yes.
And so that would require the conjunction or...
Yeah, absolutely. But this is where you get into Bayesian logic.
Right.
And I totally believe in that. I totally want to go there. But what I'm saying is this Bayesian logic does not require a formal link between the arguments. You just have all the arguments making this more likely. Well, maybe you have to model independence between them to apply Bayes' law. So that's...
And when I'm doing it, I'm not explicitly using Bayes' law, but it is some sort of similar probability thing. Or maybe I am, but I'm making the weird assumption that any claim is 100% confident, as opposed to setting a prior.
Yeah,
or my priors are all 100%, but that's weird.
I do want to go towards Bayes' law, but again, this is appropriate for causal logic, and and for belief logic, it's a bit more iffy because it's hard to speak about independence of premises, independence of supports. Not premises, independence of supports. So you cannot apply Bayes' law blindly. And it's not clear how supports combine, right? You, by intuitive temptation, without going deep into the math of it, take the max.
Well, yeah, well, when I was doing the math,
the support is the strongest link.
Well, yeah, I mean, when I was doing the math, I realized the way I was doing it, I have to make the assumption that every leaf claim is 100%, because otherwise it always results in 0. Because I'm not using Bayes. I'm just, but it's
And you're not
similar.
using max, because max would work. It's a bit weak, because sometimes, if you have 250%, they should reinforce one another.
Oh no, yeah. I'm actually using more averages than max.
Average is weaker than max.
Yeah.
And average is not a good choice, because you're weakening a good solid argument with a weak one. Why would you want to do that?
Because a weak I use
an argument is not multi-prime.
I use averaging towards, I don't know how to say it mathematically, but as it reaches, so I go from +1 to -1. As it reaches 0, in truth value, I weaken its strength. So I weight them based on their proximity to 0. That seems to follow how people think.
Okay, I don't,
because it becomes more and more unknown. Yeah, it's not Bayes, but it's just similar in the fact that it's kind of probabilities.
I can believe it may be close to how people think, but it's certainly not what I would want in the system, because it's certainly not how people should think, so to speak.
Well, I think it is.
In the sense,
it's the good parts of so we should have that discussion
we should absolutely have that discussion, because that's really important. The way I see it, I would totally want to distinguish the point.
I would like the system to be able to handle both models and many others.
Yes, we want a pluggable logic system.
And that's why I do get concerned when you kind of hard code in.
I understand you.
Yeah.
And that way, okay, fair enough. And having multiple weighing, but for me, that's at the belief layer. See, then that's why I'm not worried about it that much, because a lot of that is at the scoring layer and not at the epistemic support layer, which is what I'm having
right.
Here.
And my bias is always coming from the
scoring layer.
Yeah, because that's
fair
my
enough.
Focus.
That's a valid point, and I think that the discussion about the scoring layer is important and also needs to happen.
Whether or not it's a separate discussion or not is an interesting.
I think it's another bounded context to use.
I'm still not certain. We talked about it last time. I still am undecided. For me, it's the same bounded context, because you do want to keep scoring consistent. If anything,
well, there's a difference between consistent and optionality.
Yeah, true. True. I mean, you can definitely. It doesn't matter. It's too unrelated to this discussion.
No. It is actually kind of related. See, for me, the notion of consistency which is absolutely important, can only exist at the scoring layer, right? For me, this is the data representation layer, and you cannot speak about consistency or inconsistency at the data representation layer. Because invalid arguments are made, so they need to be represented.
You can talk about what you hope to model. Like when you talk about duplicate claims, you can hope to achieve that you keep only one, etc. I would call consistency on that level.
Okay. Where I was speaking about, what we speak about when we speak about cognitive dissonance, right? Do we hold inconsistent beliefs? Which is the case. And for me, the case where we have a zero-ish belief, and as an individual, I have zero-ish belief in a claim because I don't have evidence either way, versus I have zero-ish belief because I have strong evidence both ways, they require totally different investigation. Mm-hmm. In one case, I'm looking for evidence. In one case, I'm looking for my existing beliefs to find which one is wrong. It's a totally different way.
Yeah, they're different, but I don't know that implies a different representation.
I think it does.
I don't see that yet.
I would totally want, and for me, that would actually be a UX requirement. I would want to show inconsistent belief very differently from inconclusive
Well,
beliefs.
I think you can display that based on the data model I have. I don't think you have to store those differently in order to be able to model them differently. Because I know
I don't know how
right.
you store things, and it's possible the way you store things is perfectly adequate to it. But when you said, I'm 0 amounts to, this is how I make it weak, blah, 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 it's like, it sounded to me like you would have a single scale, and hence in a single scale, the 0 from weak arguments is the same 0 as 0 from contradictory arguments.
Yeah, so that would be one display. And I agree that there might be an important time to display when it's because of a lot of contradictory evidence, or just a little evidence that's considered may or may not be true. So yeah, adding confidence bars or something, to display it, but you can derive that either of those displays off the way I store the
Fair
data.
enough. That's good. That's good. Yeah,
That's an
I'm just saying, for me, the difference between those two is something that is important in my UX use cases. Fair enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, I'll think more about why it's important for me to isolate the argument composite. For me, the composite claim is a bit too much of a magma, and the being able to distinguish necessary premise, blah, 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 at the model level is an important use case. And this is why I'm doing maximum decomposition in the model, rather than having to dig into the composite claim relation type. But maybe I need to justify that better. Fair enough.
And I guess we need to probably dig into rebuttals.
Dig
Because
in
that
what?
may be different. Dig into rebuttals, because that may be different than what I think of as a con statement.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I want the rebuttals. I've added it. It was a bit tentative because I just read the truth maintenance system, which has them. And it's true that it is nice to have rebuttals distinct from implicit premises, because they're a bit more exceptional. And adding rebuttals should be easier than adding implicit premise, precisely because of the problem that Stephen was pointing out about adding a bunch of implicit premises and ending up with a hairball of implicit premises, whereas adding rebuttals is kind of lighter. So that's why I was tempted to add them, but I realized it kind of breaks canonicality on the other hand, because something can be a premise or a rebuttal, and forcing them one way or another without having a clear rule to distinguish them is breaking canonicality. So I'm still.
Well, we don't have to discuss it now, but I don't see how, without rebuttals, how do you express, if you have
a premise to a negation of the claim.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, you add a premise, and you add a negative
what it's
premise.
Implied here. It's not shown in the claim, but I think that's. But I think I'm calling it a day. It was very interesting. Cool. I think a lot of questions popped up.
Yes.
Okay. Well,
thanks for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you too.
See you.
Bye, everybody.
See you. Bye.